Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. We are doing the Bible series of Jordan Peterson. This is on the second video of Genesis 1, Chaos and Order. The format is we're going to have Roger, first Victor give his take using his amazing PowerPoints. Then Roger give his takes. They're going to hit 5 main points. And then we're going to, once they are done, it's going to be short presentations, about 30 minutes total. Even if you have not heard of Jordan Peterson, if you have not watched the series, or if you have not even heard of Bible, all of it, I want to make it all accessible because these are deep philosophical points which each of us deal with. So after the 30-minute presentations, we're going to have breakout rooms. We're going to have 5 breakout rooms on the 5 key questions. Each breakout room will be anchored by one of the facilitators, and each breakout room will run for 20 minutes. And we're going to run them multiple times. So even if the room that you want to go to is crowded, go to your second choice. In the second round or third round, you'd be able to go to the room that you want to go to. Okay, so it's going to be very deep discussions on specific points, 5 points today of that are covered in this video. All right, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Victor. Victor, floor is yours.
Thank you, Shrikant. Guys, tonight we are discussing the second video of Jordan Peterson's biblical series. Peterson opens the video with he reminds us what we discussed in the previous video. And in the previous video, or in the first lecture, we understood what we are trying to frame, what the properties of God. And some of these properties it's an attempt to abstract a power over a specific acts of power. That's one aspect of it. Second one is to associate the power to the consciousness. And also the consciousness, it gives rise to itself. And it's also, this particular consciousness has its own cosmic quality. And at the same time, that particular consciousness also is associated with human beings. So those are the points to frame the idea of God. And looking into the Bible, from New Testament, we have 4 Gospels, and one of the Gospels is John. There is this opening in John. It says, in the beginning, there was Word, and the Word was with God, and Word was God. And in the Old Testament, there is a parallel to the same idea in the opening of Genesis, where it says, in the beginning, God created heavens and earth. The earth was without form and void, and the darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So there is an odd parallel between these two ideas. And one way to look at it is Christ is the same force or same idea that God used in the beginning to create habitable environment from chaos. That's the idea. So there is this parallel. And why? Let's look into what other parallels we can draw. And here, if we look at the words void and deep, in the original text in Hebrew, it is referred as tehom, or tohu or bohu. And tehom, the word which relates to the word void, it comes from, the tehom word comes from the word kehom, or chaos. And the word kehom relates to Tiamat, And we will come to the word Tiamat in a little bit. So these are the words from Hebrew, and they got translated into void and deep into English. And let's look at the source and evolution of this particular text so that we understand what chaos is. For that, let's also look at the timeline of the Bible, how the Bible came into existence. So it came into existence in 4th century, and that's the New Testament. The New Testament has 29 books. And before that, of course, there is the idea of Christ that was at the dawn of millennium. And before that, we had Old Testament. That was Old Testament was of 39 books. Sorry, I said 29 books of New Testament. It's 27 and 39 of 39 books in Old Testament. They were put together around 300 BC. And if we go a little bit back, the Abrahamic religion and Abrahamic religions and the culture, from the history, we know that it started around 1400 BC. And before that, we had Mesopotamian culture, where there is a similar story, and that is Tiamat, Apsu, and Marduk. And we discussed this one in our Maps of Meaning series, where the structure of this story is exactly the same. There is the chaos, and chaos is represented by the Tiamat, and Apsu is the representation of order that comes together, and that gives rise to the world. That's the creation myth in a Mesopotamian culture. And if we go back, this particular story is based upon Sumerian creation myth, where Namu and Nahamu, they are the primordial forces. They come together and give rise to An and Ki, Ki meaning the sky, An meaning the earth. And they give rise to Enlil. That is Enlil is the son of An and Ki. What we are trying to get at is there is this parallel among all these creation myths. That parallel, or that particular pattern, is chaos and order and something that intervenes between them. That's the parallel. So chaos, we tend to have a different meaning, or we derive a different meaning for it. But actually, chaos, we should actually think of it as the potential. The potential, and order is more of a structure, and there is something that which intervenes between them, and that gives rise to the experience, the world. And for this, let's look at a real life example. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions. If anyone is ready to answer, that would be great. So no trick questions at all, just looking at the pictures. So what I'm seeing on the left and right is, so in the left, I see a few people somewhere in the woods, maybe going on a hike. And on the right, I see a few people. There's a pavement, and there are people, and they are just observing around. If I ask a question like, what do you see in these pictures? Do any of you have any answer? What I see is woods and people and nature. And
folks, if you want to answer, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat. Or you can type in chat, whatever you prefer. Going to give another 10 seconds.
I'll respond.
Go ahead.
So I see people walking through the woods on the left, and people on a road on the right.
Right, exactly. And if we look at the environment, we can say that we see trees and probably a little birds and living beings and shoes and jackets, etc. And
Tim,
what is it that is enabling us to experience this one? If we ask that question, does anyone have any answer, anything that is an answer?
Can you repeat the question again?
What is it that is enabling us to see these things when we see woods or trees or birds or human beings or anything?
Okay. So it's going to be Tim, Larry, and Evanique. Tim.
Well, I mean, we're imposing our past experiences on the pictures that you're presenting. So we have some past experience of walking in the woods or being with our friends walking on a road, and we can relate that to our past experiences.
Absolutely, that's wonderful.
Okay, so
Thank
we'll
you.
take two brief answers from Larry and Evanique. Larry. Larry, you need to unmute yourself.
The major difference is that in the second picture, we also see them observing. It seems like they're just people in passage. In the second, they're observing and they seem to be alive and being aware of their surroundings.
Perfect. Thank you, Larry.
Next
Thank
up
you.
is Evanique.
I think also we can, what enables us to experience it is what we're told. So when we see a lot of woods, we know from our past experiences or what our parents told us or what people have told us that that's woods. So it could also be from like secondhand stories.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks so much. And
Can I say one comment?
yes,
Just in relation to what other people are saying. If you look, the difference between the two pictures, the one where the group is ahead and the other group is behind, this is a common setup for people that are in combat where you have scouts out in front. So they're actually, in my opinion, just more engaged. Whereas the people on the right, they're just meandering down the road with no thoughts or cares. So.
well, thank you so much, Tim. That's a great observation. And one thing that we can say is, so there are people and they are observing, and a couple of points that were mentioned is we tend to reflect the past experiences. And for that, what we can say is we have an interpretive structure and an interpretive faculty, meaning, so we have a body and we have something that makes us think about it, whether it's past experience or the thing that we are seeing right now. And the idea being, if we don't have that body or the consciousness, there is no such thing as experience because we don't have a body or a consciousness. And it also, the other way to say it is, there is no form and there's nothing there because we are not there. And the same idea I'm gonna present in a schematic form. Let's say there is nothing out there, and there is a faculty that looks out, which makes the difference between what's out there and what's inside. So that's the faculty that differentiates the chaos or the potential from the known. And that particular faculty lets us see the structure in the chaos, in the potential. And another way to say it is the consciousness in a particular body, not a floating consciousness, that is an embodied consciousness that is in a particular body that can, when we have that consciousness, we can differentiate between the structure and the chaos. So that's another way to put it. And now let's look at the picture over here. Now we have the woods, and there is a person. There are three persons over there, and they are observing. And there is a person with an embodied consciousness. That particular person can experience the structure, And if there is no person, that person cannot experience anything. So that's the idea behind chaos and order and the idea of consciousness. Now, the idea being consciousness is primary, and especially consciousness in a particular body, that is the only thing that can experience any kind of structure. Now, coming back to the word, we just discussed New Testament and Old Testament, how God created heavens and earth. And now let's relate it to what we just discussed. Just like in the previous myths from Sumerian and Mesopotamian culture, the third verse goes to say, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and God called the light day and the darkness the night. And this particular idea, so God, when God is associated with consciousness, and that consciousness differentiates day being something structured, darkness meaning something that is still in potential. And Peterson also says the primacy of consciousness. Consciousness as that which gives rise to itself, and it has its own cosmic quality. And it is not a floating consciousness. It is an embodied consciousness that is associated with human beings. And then he goes on to explain Adam and Eve stories, but also now we are not concentrating on that one. And to reiterate the attributes of God, God is an abstract ideal, and now this consciousness, which is God, is an abstracted ideal formulated to disassociate with any particular instantiated form, like a ruler or a king or a human. And the idea is, if we confuse the ruler as an ideal, the state immediately turns into a biblical Egypt. So these are the things discussed in the first lecture.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Victor. Next up is Roger. Roger, go ahead.
Thank you. All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So picking up from Victor's point about the primacy of consciousness and the idea that it's there, you can at least make the argument that the fact that we're all currently right now sitting in front of our computers and the fact that we're seeing and experiencing things may not necessarily, like a more nihilistic perspective, be some meaningless, chemical reaction that's happening on some dead matter, but rather that's the most important part that's happening in the universe. You can at least make that case. You may not necessarily agree with it or even buy it, but there is a case to actually be made. So I would like to start first and foremost by kind of reviewing Peterson's ideas of chaos and order and kind of pointing out how he conceptualizes it different than he has before, and for example, maps of meaning, or not so much different here, but he's using one specific point. So chaos tends to be the representation of, oftentimes represented as the feminine, a lot of times because it's essentially the birthplace, the place that everything comes from. It's essentially the totality as a whole. It's also represented as the unknown. Psychologically, Peterson believes that that's kind of the main dichotomy that our brains have, that we're adapted to differentiate between the known and the unknown and act differently depending on where we're at. And you can also conceptualize it as chaos is everything that has not been categorized, everything that we haven't been able to split up into pieces and understand yet. And also oftentimes it's represented as a natural threat of some form, because essentially since it holds all possible things and humans tend to be threat sensitive and risk averse, that normally means that they're not going to risk it, and they're going to first and foremost assume that there's danger there. And that's why little, kids in general tend to be scared of the dark. It's not because there's necessarily anything that the dark is scary. It's that the dark is an unknown quantity. You don't know what's in the dark, and that's what makes it scary. And most importantly here, for our purpose, the main thing that I would say that should be really highlighted is that the chaos is represented as potential of the future. So in the first few lines of the Bible that Peterson reads, when he speaks about this vast void, and as Victor was covering about all those different iterations of essentially chaos, you can also conceptualize it as potential. And essentially that potential is infinite, but has no form. It's both a void, something that has nothing, but then it's filled with, yeah, I mean, we don't even really have the language to describe what potential is, because it's nothing. It doesn't exist anywhere, but we all fully understand what it is. And we know that we could, if only done right, bring it to be whatever it is that we're imagining that is a potential. And moving to order, which is also a slight twist here. Order is the masculine principle, often because it's the force that imposes limitations. It's the thing that restricts. It is the known, so it holds everything that is understood and categorized, or at least that we believe is understood and categorized. Oftentimes, like as Pearson described, like a descent into the underground is when something that you already think you understand and know shows you that it really isn't, and you really don't understand it. It's also the underlying structure that gives reality its shape. It's essentially what creates its limits. You can think of it, and this is what makes Peterson's theory so beautiful, is that you can think of it on so many different layers. Just for example, everything that you know and understand, you can choose any topic. Your understanding of that is still limited by the information that you already know. It's not limited by what it actually is, but limited only by your knowledge. There's a restrictive element to that. And that's what he means by order. And we're going to talk about a little bit how that can start to get played with. And that's one of Peterson's main points. And it's also represented as a social masculine judge that imposes structure. This is, as Victor was alluding to, this is where that abstraction of authority comes from, that God concept, that society and our culture and your past and every structure that you kind of live in, were born into, and are a part of, is also judging you. It's also holding you to a certain responsibility. And it's also the guiding principle that creates reality, that because essentially without order, there's not only nothing known, but there's no means to know. There is no structure that allows you to even begin to comprehend or have any anchor into which way would be up. So understanding chaos and order in this framework was the first thing I wanted to establish for the next couple of points. Because the next point are the creation and its three elements. For anyone who did come to the Maps of Meaning lectures, these three elements should be quite familiar. And also it's interesting that they're conceptualized again with the chaos here, or with the potential here. So formless potential is a great stand-in for the Great Mother, for chaos. It is infinite, it has infinite possibility, but because it can be anything, it's not really anything. And it holds all the possibilities, yet it's none of them, as it requires something to give it force, something of limitation, which is, it's funny because that's essentially the riddle that Peterson constantly says, that what is omnipotent, omnipotent, and omnibus? No, I can't remember. What does an almighty, powerful God lack? It's like, well, limitations. That's the thing that defines reality. It's the very thing that creates its shape. And that's where order as a guiding principle comes in, the Great Father. This is in part the dead structure that limits and restricts reality in such a way that allows reality at all, in the way we understand reality, to exist. Your body, as Victor had alluded to, is a part of this. In other words, what your body isn't just some creation that your parents decided to design. It is millions and millions of years of evolution, of lots of death, of a bunch of failed attempts to get whatever the hell it is that we are to this point. And whatever it is that we are is designed, and whatever it is that we're experiencing, this consciousness, is a direct result of exactly that process. And because it's a direct result of exactly this abstract process, this destructuring of consciousness, that's why consciousness is the son of the Great Father. It is through the process of evolution and all, whatever perspective you want to take, that out of that comes whatever the hell we are, which is consciousness. And that son, it's the son of the guiding principle. It's what gives the dead structure life. It's, though you had no part in creating it, it's what you're the entity that actually goes and confronts chaos, retrieves from it things of value, and serves a larger structure, serves the Great Father, essentially, or if you're like, serves God, right? So you can see these connections through these archetypes. So that kind of seeing those connections between chaos and formless potential, order guiding principle, and the hero and consciousness, and then linking them also to the great archetypes. And then finally, we can start jumping into two more ideas. One that I think was also really important and interesting is just understanding why Peterson sees free speech as super important, to the point where it's more of a religious belief for him than just a political one. Because as Peterson points out, language, especially in the way we use it, is extremely unique. It's only a human ability. We've tried to teach other animals, different forms of language, and it doesn't really seem to work quite well. So the next question then is to wonder, what is it exactly that language actually does? If you think of what actually language is, it's essentially a sound that creates a category, right? Certain things it applies to, certain things it doesn't. That's all language. Every word that exists can be at least categorized as that. And language is the mechanism that allows us to split the world into what it is that we have. Something that made me think it made me think of was a Khmer saying from Cambodia that I learned while I was serving there. That was Koko Multuratura, which essentially means a cow watching television. And it's an inside joke that whenever you're someone saying something that's like way above your head, some of you might be saying it now, but that you're like, I feel like a cow watching television. But the joke there is that a cow isn't even aware of what's happening in front of them, right? There's just don't have the mechanisms or the capacity to differentiate the different images and symbols that are being put in front of it. In the same way, language is what allows us to, in a way, break that up. A good example of this would be, I've made a little example here, where you can imagine a professional painter, a professional artist, and a layman. And both of them are showed 3 different samples of a color. And the layman says, oh, they're all blue. And the artist says, like, oh, well, that one's cobalt, that one's indigo, that one's sky blue, right? And it's this ability to create categories, this ability, for example, for the artist to fully know the difference between those that actually allows them to even see them in the first place. And you can actually experience this with just about anything that you don't know anything about, right? Go watch a football game. If you don't know anything about football, you don't even know when to cheer, right? Go watch a fight or a boxing match. You don't even know what's going on. Anything that you've put effort to learn, and then you start to get the hobby, you start to actually see the distinctions. You start to learn all the different words that you associate with the different acts that allow you to actually appreciate it. So the whole point of all this is that the words that we create is actually what gives us, the words that we use creates the reality that we see, essentially. So the more language we have, the more different of a reality we're exposed to. To make this point, you can also imagine that the more precise we become in splitting up the world, the better we can use the smaller pieces. So a lot of times in a lot of religious texts, God or the absolute is normally conceptualized as a totality, right? Even in, for example, the Bible, before God comes into the world was without form, it was void, it didn't have anything. And what separates it, what makes it into something, there's almost always the pre-cosmogonic egg, and then some form of death separation, right? As Victor was alluding to. That separation tends to almost always be what through language, through words. For example, God in this case speaks the world into being through words. And that's why Peterson's referring to when he says that, for example, in Adam and Eve, when Adam names all the animals, they don't even really exist before they're named, because you wouldn't even identify that as a thing that needs to be identified until you have the word to identify it. So keeping that idea, which is a very weird idea, but very important for Peterson's point about the logos, you can start to see that for humans, language seems to be a tool that allows us to really differentiate and break reality into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, and then use those tiny pieces. Now, if you overlap that exact idea with the Marduk creation myth, you see exactly what they were alluding to. Because Marduk has magical words, he speaks fire, and he goes in, encapsulates Tiamat, cuts her into pieces, and then out of those pieces makes the world. Right. And that's a perfect, like, you can see the similarity there with what the God is doing there that creates humanity and what we do all the time. That's what science essentially is a breaking down and a categorization of the known world, and then finding ways to use those pieces that we've broken down. So if that is all the case, or if you're following me so far, now you can take this concept and consider it to also potential and chaos, and realizing that logos has a creative aspect, but then on top of that, considering that one, language is a social dynamic. It's not by itself. So it's not just as though you say it's something and it's only you that it affects. Almost always when you use language, it's for someone else. So it's a cumulative structure, similar to kind of what we're referring to as our culture past, this representation of God. It's all the information from our past coming in, all the order. And then within that, creating something new, and creating and allowing us to create new conceptualizations of reality. And if all that was way, way, way too much, I also wrote a real quick secular translation that doesn't require all that, mumbo jumbo. Peterson's main point here, from a less religious and symbolic perspective, is through the manifestation of true speech, we create a world, and that process, which is also a social process. And truthful speech will naturally render the best outcome, as it's the closest representation to reality that we can manage. Therefore, doing the best that we can with the most honest information we can is intrinsically good, right? It's just naturally good. It hits us as good. If I asked you, do you want me to lie to you or do you want me to tell the truth? There's something just intuitive. It's like, well, yeah, just tell me the truth. I'd rather know the truth so I can manage whatever I need to do to respond to that. It doesn't help me unless I'll just never find out, right? But it doesn't really help me resolve my issues if you're also lying to me. So Peterson's main point is that through truthful speech, it is actually speech that gives us our capacity to come up with anything new at all. And that's actually what gives the old structure life. And that's why he's willing to stake his claim on this idea of freedom of speech, because without freedom of speech for him, you're destroying the means that everything else came to be, right? And that's even reflected in our ancient religions, that there is something divine and holy about speech. And now bringing it back to inauthentic speech, and one last point that I do think is really important, because I think it's a really cool point, is the idea of nihilism and responsibility, and what Peterson believes might actually be going on here. And this is much more of this much more just his opinion, but it's still a very interesting opinion. Before we get to that, real quick, just a quick recap on Peterson's idea of belief. The main question always becomes, well, what is it that you believe? How do you answer that question? because belief can be your thoughts. In other words, is belief what you think you believe? And if that's the case, well, then there's always a lot of times when you'll act out of accordance with what you believe, right? You may believe you're a great, good person, and then you do something terrible. You may say you're an honest person, and then you're lying, right? So if you want to define belief as that, it's like, sure, but that's not very consistent or very useful, right? It doesn't really, it just tells you your own opinion about yourself. That is not helpful. Jung was actually the one that proposed this, but that, as far as I know, that proposed that instead it's your actions that define what you believe. As in the end, it's your actions that show who you really are. Your belief about your beliefs may as well just be a convenient lie to help you manage your self-image. So keeping that in mind, Peterson sees the philosophy of nihilism, that everything is meaningless, as a mental illness, in which the rational faculty of the psyche has invalidated all structures of value, as well as a belief in value structures themselves. With this in mind, let's play out of what it would mean for someone to believe in nihilism. So the first one, which is, I did the Big Lebowski, believing in nothing. But the first one would be, for example, if belief really is only what you believe in thought, and you believe in nihilism, then life is meaningless, and it quickly becomes a trivial and pointless exercise. You live your life, but you're not even knowing why you bother. And though Peterson even points out, it's not quite clear why you care, why people outside of you would even have opinion that's relevant to your existence. Like he says, like the rocks, like, yeah, the rocks don't care that you're alive. So what? Like the cosmos doesn't care that you're alive. Like, yeah, so what? They don't care about anything because they're not conscious. Why would that matter? But Peterson, and more importantly, his bigger criticism is, and if we conceptualize belief more as action, as what you act out, if someone is a nihilist, then nothing has any meaning. Then it's the case that action becomes impossible because there's no distinction between any decision at any point. Here you run into the same problem we were talking earlier, where if you don't have any structure at all, then nothing exists. Everything stays in potential. You have no way of choosing. There's no guiding principle at all. So this is why Peterson thinks that nihilism isn't even a viable belief system, since the true adherence to the idea renders it impossible, but there's something that is gained when this perspective is adapted. Because if nothing matters, and you really are just a worthless virus that happened to succeed, then you may not have any cosmic importance, but you also have no cosmic responsibility. And for Peterson, he thinks this part may be more in play than we'd like to admit. If nothing matters, then you never have to feel bad about any decision you've ever made. But as he points out, the alternative is much scarier and much more demanding. The possibility that everything matters, that every choice, every word matters, that it truly shapes the reality is a much more terrifying idea. And I want to break down one more time for anyone who's more secular minded, that this perspective is essentially just a mixture of causality and chaos theory. If any change to any causal chain can greatly change the entirety of the result across the entire system, and you are a part of a system, then every choice you have has a direct causal outcome. You being unaware of those results doesn't absolve you. In other words, you hold responsibility for every effect that you have in this constant billiard game that we're playing in the cosmos. So these were some of the main points that I think we really wanted to keep in mind, especially considering some of the points that he covered. But thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Roger. All right, folks. So now it's time for the breakout rooms. We're going to have 6 breakout rooms, and each of them is going to have a facilitator in them. Okay. So we're trying something new out here. You're going to be able to move from breakout room to breakout rooms. We're going to do many rounds of it, at least 3 rounds of 20 minutes each, maybe 4. Let's say 3 rounds. There are going to be 6 topics. Okay. The first one, and Pegor, if you could type it up. The first room is going to be on creation stories. So that's the topic. The question is, how do you understand creation stories? The second one is going to be on chaos and order. You know, what is your conception of chaos? And what is your conception of order? Those are the questions in the second room. The third room is going to be on the concept of Great Mother, Great Father, and the Divine Son. Okay, how do you understand these? The fourth room is going to be on the divinity of Logos. What is the role of Logos? Fifth room, I've decided to do 6 rooms. I was originally trying 5, but that's too many people to the room. So the next room is going to be on freedom of speech. So the room 4 is going to look at Logos kind of inside you and with a little bit about outside you, whereas the fifth room is going to be freedom of speech, kind of outside role of Logos, connected with inside. So you can choose, you can spend time in each of them across multiple rounds. And the last one is going to be on nihilism and responsibility. So those are the 6 rooms. Now, the facilitators, let me see, there are going to be Roger, Victor, me, Joe, Pegor, Brian Nelson. Can you be a facilitator?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So these are the 6 facilitators. What we'll do is that in the first one, we get to pick, and then all we have to do is to make sure we will keep switching the rooms. We just have to make sure that one of us is there in each of the rooms. So we'll start off with Victor in the first room that he anchored. And then I will give choice to everybody else. So let's start with Pegor, Joe, Brian, Roger, and I'll take the last one. So Pegor, which room would you like to go to? I'm going to open up the rooms and you can go ahead. I'll open up the rooms in a minute, but go ahead. Pegor, which room would you like?
I wasn't paying attention as I was typing things up.
Okay, sure. That's fine.
I'll take whatever's left. It's okay.
Yeah. Which room would you like? You're going to be the facilitator. So what the facilitator's job is to make sure that everybody gets to talk and everybody is courteous. If there is a problem, just, you can handle it. You're very capable of handling all problems. All right. So just go ahead and choose Pegor. So Pegor, go ahead.
I'll go with the first one. Which one?
The first one is already taken. You can take any other ones.
Oh, okay. Number 2 then.
Number 2. Okay. Next up is going to be Brian and Joe. Brian, what would you like? Okay, you're on mute. Okay, so folks, go ahead and pick.
3 is fine.
Okay, 3 is fine. Okay. Joe, which one will you take first?
I'll take 6.
6. Okay. And Roger, 4 or 5?
I'll take 5.
Okay, I'll take 4. All right, folks, I'm opening up the rooms. Try to have maximum. If there are 10 people in the room, don't go in there. Okay. Don't go in there. You'll get a chance. We're going to run this multiple times. Each time we'll run it for 20 minutes and we'll come back here. I'll remake the rooms, the same topics. The facilitators will also switch rooms. So all of us get to discuss at least 3 of the topics, minimum 3 of the topics. Okay. So starting the breakout rooms now. If you have difficulty getting into a room, just go ahead and type in and say which room you'd like to go into. And facilitators, if you go ahead and jump into the rooms that you have chosen. Okay, if anybody needs help, Mary, go ahead and tell me which room you'd like to go to, and I will put you there.
Sure, put me in 4. I'm just,
Okay.
that's fine.
4. Let's see who else is remaining. Ellen.
Yeah, Shrikan, I had indicated room 3.
Okay. Let's see. Does anybody else need any help? Jade, do you know how to go to rooms?
Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't listening.
Okay, which room would you like?
You choose for me if you want, guys. Sorry.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good.
I'm mystified. I can't even change my name. I can't even rename myself.
Okay, I'll just put you in some room, okay?
Just put me somewhere. Home is.
Okay, let's see here. We had the misfortune of being born in 1940s. So we had, our, FDR here, the Fabian socialists were there in UK, all kinds of stuff was happening in Soviet Union, and we had our kind of socialism, so it was a thing, and it kind of, I think it set India back, maybe 20 years, 30 years, maybe 40 years. But it is coming roaring back because India was part of the first global economy, which was basically British Empire. And they used to say that maybe the British Empire could run without the British, but could never run without Indians. Because Indians were everywhere, whether if you went to Africa or Southeast Asia, they were everywhere. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, that's that's good. Because in 1947, when Britain lost India, or India got independence, basically it was until the Thatcher came into power. Basically, it was over for Great Britain when you think about it. So who lost whom? By my opinion, because they anyway. But definitely one of the main reasons why India and China are doing so well in the last 30 years, because that's exactly 30 years ago when communism finally collapsed and wasn't supporting as much all those countries as they did before. And I think mainly the people in India and China, like.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. All right, so it's time for takeaways. What did you get from this discussion? You can talk both about the content, you can talk about the format, anything that you want to talk about. So go ahead and type an exclamation mark in chat in order to share your takeaways from the meetup. And we'll go from there. As always, we have the 4 rules. Stay on topic. Raise your hand when you want to speak or type exclamation mark in chat. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, speak your mind authentically. Feel free to disagree with anybody on anything and do so courteously. Next up is going to be Evanique, Yen, and Derek. Evanique.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I love the format that the breakout room. So just wanted to say that. And number 2, I think the biggest thing I got is the idea of chaos and order, and that chaos is a feminine energy and order is a masculine, but it's embodied in each of us, and that they work together, and that like our concept of chaos is bad and our concept of order is generally good, but they both work together. And the way it's just defined as chaos as this creativity, I just think that was just like mind-blowing and excellent, and I love that. So that was it.
Cool. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Yen, followed by Derek. Yen.
Yeah, I just want to say I like the format. Yeah, let's do more of that, please. Thanks. That's it.
Thank you. Derek.
I like the format. As far as takeaways, I think so. I mostly came in on the nihilism discussion, but it sounds like a lot of the discussions here kind of get at dichotomies in existence and dealing with chaos and logos and the conflict between like nihilism and whether everything matters or nothing matters. And I think that what it kind of boiled down to for me was something that I've been trying to get at for a long time at many different angles, like scientifically and philosophically, is that it seems that the universe consists of all of these seeming dichotomies that really don't disagree with each other, but they're both true. So like nothing matters, everything matters. Well, in the grand universe, nothing matters, but in terms of like the tiny little details of how every single mechanism in your brain works, everything matters. But really, to function as a human being in this world, we need to accept that both of those are true, but we're in the middle of them. And I think that that's kind of what I come away with this, is that there's a grace to be had in being able to stand abreast of chaos and order, of everything meaning something and nothing meaning anything, and recognize that in some ways they're both true all the time, but that they kind of cancel each other out and you have to figure out where you balance yourself in the middle.
Wonderful. Beautifully put. Thank you. Thank you. So Derek, one thing I would recommend strongly to you is Tao Te Ching. We've been going through Tao Te Ching, and that is the deepest capturing of the idea that you're talking about. Because Lao Tzu, I mean, much more than I Ching. I Ching is much more like a technical thing. It's like a tactical thing of how do you adjust. But Tao Te Ching actually is a way of saying, you're just focused on the Tao and you are paying attention to it. And you're doing that relentlessly. And all of these kind of seeming contradictions are just kind of temporary states. And because you're focused on nature and because you're focused on how nature works and you work and you are part of nature, you accept these things as things that flow through you and flow in nature. And Lao Tzu puts it far, far, far better than I do. And folks, if you're not familiar with our, we do this on Tuesdays. We take like one poem or one chapter, which is like very tiny. It's like just about this much. And we have many people read their different translations, which are actually interpretations of it. And then we discuss it. So many of us are writing our own translations of it. So don't miss that. It's something very, very special. And it really talks about order and chaos. I love how Jordan Peterson deals with it, but I think Lao Tzu is at a different level of capturing this point. So thanks, Derek. Next up is going to be Jean.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, like, because when I discussed in the group order and chaos, it reminded me so much about the Tao Te Ching, about the name create all things, all these things, and how this follow each other, define each other. So, oh, that's exactly what they're talking about. So I like the format because it's have different focus in each room, but I just feel a little bit stressed. It seems.
Why was it stressed?
Intense workout. Like
oh yeah, that's a good thing. That's a good thing,
So I hope we are not changing every meeting into this.
No, Tao Te Ching is working very well, so I'm not going to change that format. But I think this is good because what it does is it allows us to kind of focus on things. And so folks, anybody who wants to share their takeaways, go ahead and type exclamation mark. My biggest takeaway was on logos. And this is something actually I have to thank my friend Yasuhiko, who understands the West and East really, really well. If you look at the East, it operates implicitly. Like Lao Tzu is focused on existence, and he's focused on consciousness. And he gets that really, really well. The West is far, far superior than Lao Tzu on naming. We really know how to name things, okay? And you can see it in the tradition, going back to the Bible, of the emphasis on naming. Whereas Lao Tzu says, you know, that which can be named is not true Tao, okay? Which is actually true, because he's simply saying that existence is what it is. Don't forget that. Don't replace the names that you come up. Don't mistake the names that you come up with existence itself. At the same time, so he gets what names are really well. But West has a very elaborate system of handling names, of saying, you make hypothesis, be always open to change, open to correcting the hypothesis. Entire of scientific method is about that, of being cognizant of what names are, subjecting the names. You have my favorite thinker on this is John Boyd and the OODA loop. It's saying that any orientation you have is you use it to decide what you need to do based on your orientation, and then you act on it. And then you observe, pay attention to what has happened, and reorient yourself. So it's a very advanced way of thinking about naming, which is what the hallmark of West is, which has created the science, technology, it has transformed the world, brought us incredible prosperity. The East is very good at not forgetting the existence and consciousness and the importance of that. So I think both East and West have tremendous things to offer each other. I also want to tell you that Yasuhiko is going to be back on this Sunday at 5 p.m. And we are going to be talking about self-realization, the tradition of self-realization. West proceeds, regards wisdom as the primary thing that it's the highest intellectual adventure, whereas East regards self-realization as that. What is the difference between that? What is the similarity? How do you bring that together? That's what I'll be talking to Yasuhiko about at 5 o'clock on Sunday. So don't miss that. Next up is Joe. Joe, what did you get?
I got a couple different things. Specifically from the meaning and nihilism group. We had a good conversation. Essentially, once you find meaning, that it's much more difficult because you have responsibilities versus nihilism, where you can abdicate some of those responsibilities. But I think the main thing that I really will take away is something similar to what you were just talking about, the idea, the importance of naming and bringing things into our consciousness. And that once you do name things, that you start to, and something that Roger said during his presentation that I thought would really hit home is that there's the importance of the precision of our words. And once we know, that allows us to really understand reality at a much grander scale. And that human beings are uniquely able to do this. This is something that is uniquely human. So when we're explaining consciousness, that the ability to articulate ourselves is, kind of gets to the heart of who we are. It also gave me a different perspective on language as well. We've talked quite a bit, whether it be Walter Ong and everything, but this is a different way of looking at language and relating it to consciousness. So there's a few different things that I took away. The Order and Chaos group was also very good as well. And I'll leave it there for now.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Was the experience of running the breakout rooms good?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, I loved everybody who participated. I was always in a good room with good people, so it was a pleasure.
Excellent. So I'm going to go with anybody who I'm going to call on the facilitators to give their own take, both of what they learned in terms of content, as well as any kind of thoughts that they, what the experience was like and whether you're willing to do it again. So it's next up is going to be Madeline, followed by Pegor. Madeline, go ahead. Go ahead, Joe.
I just want to say thank you to Roger and Victor again for the presentation. I mean, it was really fantastic. And one drawback is that I couldn't be in the rooms. So.
Okay, that's yeah, yes. Thank you. Next up is Madeline, followed by Pegor. Madeline.
Yes, thank you for mentioning science, Shrikant, because that's what I had been thinking about. I think that the big, huge achievement of all of these ways of thinking that we're discussing in the Western tradition, from the Greeks through the Abrahamic religions, has been science and the scientific method, which has arisen in bits and pieces in other parts of the world in different times, but really has only come together once, and we're living in the fruits of that era. Yeah, I don't really have anywhere else to go with that. I just wanted to say it. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I also want to say that if you really want to understand science, you have to look at scientists, because what is called science today is mostly products of science. The thing which is actually creates science, you have to look at how Darwin operated, how Newton operated, how Faraday operated. And there is actually a sense, I see them as being just big kids. So there is a level of curiosity. There is a level of kind of openness, wanting to correct things, being full of questions, which is actually a very different mindset than what people think what science is. And that's what actually has created this. And we kind of enjoy the products of it, but don't really take the time and effort to rise up to the way of thinking, as a scientist. So that is a side. Next up is going to be Pegor. Pegor, how was it? What did you learn? And what was it like facilitating the breakout rooms?
I liked the discussions. They were interesting, nice and challenging, but I did find that the discussions were a bit short because of the time. Maybe add another 5 minutes. I'm not sure.
This is bad. I used to do 15 minutes. Joe said 20 minutes. Everybody agreed 20 minutes. So now I did 20 minutes and there is +5. No, because what happens is that I want, at the same time, people insist that they want to participate in all of the breakout rooms. And at the same time, I'm trying to end the meetup in 2 hours. So I think 20 minutes is about as much as we can do, because then I want people to be able to go to different topics. At least 3 rounds I want to do.
Fair enough. And I just want to say thank you to Roger, Victor, and you for organizing it and doing the presentations.
Thank you, Pegor. Next up is going to be Brian, and then let's see, Brian, Victor, and Roger. Brian.
So first of all, I want to echo Pegor's comments. Thank you to Shrikant, as always. And this week I was able to listen to the lectures before the session. So it really brought me to appreciate the preparation and presentation that Victor and Roger have made. I thought they really brought out the essence of that lecture. And it's not easy to capture what Jordan's talking about. I have an observation that, first of all, I loved being the mediator. I didn't have a lot to say, unless nobody else had anything to say, and then they got to hear what I thought. The one key takeaway from the Great Mother, Great Father, Divine Son is that Jordan Peterson's done a valuable service in reintroducing, reintegrating, re-emphasizing the female in the creation process. And it's not something that happened just once at the origin of time. It's something that's happening all the time today, and that's what gives it real force. And also kind of echoing what Derek said earlier, it's not that the women are just all the potential and the men are all the actualization. There's there's those are personifications that tend to characterize, but the reality is that individual people land in between. So we toyed around a little bit with the the limitations of the personifications, but I think in general we found it very evocative and led to a lot of understanding and in-depth discussion. I do have one comment that I would like to make on a topic that I didn't join in on, but I've had some thoughts on it based on Victor's and Roger's presentation. It's how, and again, it's following up really on what Shrikant and others have said, that the West is somehow more active and engaged. I find that Jordan Peterson in his presentations, and as is captured by Roger and Victor, but they didn't really make articulate, Jordan Peterson moves from observation to judgment a lot in one step. And I think that's the way the West is. The West, it doesn't just name things. Once it names them, it figures out what it can do with them. And it doesn't bother to name them unless it looks like there's something that you can do with it. And so they try it out to see what can be done. And a simple example of that is that consciousness, I wrote this down very early, consciousness enables the perception of chaos, which is both potential and danger. So that right away is an evaluation. It's a judgment on chaos, this unknown, as either being of a possible benefit to me or a possible risk to me. So it's a reflection, it's a field, an unknown field, but I understand it as it relates to me. And I identify it as it relates to me, and very quickly it's assessed as whether or not it can be a useful tool or something to be avoided. And that is just so embedded in the Western way of thinking. It's nice sometimes to try to step away from that.
Excellent comments, Brian. I just want to say that I just see this is very nice, because every time somebody says something, you make new connections. It's Carl Jung who actually brought a lot of the East to the West. So for example, this idea of self, idea of the unconscious, and conscious as kind of a small part of the unconscious, your ego as being a small part of the self. This is very much Eastern. And even his way of presentation is kind of closer to the East, though he's using words, he's using everything, but he's bringing some of the ways of thinking from the East. And Jordan Peterson certainly is kind of, basing his work on Carl Jung, but he's kind of even more Western than Carl Jung when you compare the two. So I think there is that connection between the East through Carl Jung in Jordan Peterson's work. Okay. Next up is going to be Victor. Victor, what did you get?
Oh, yeah, thank you so much. And the first thing I have to say, the format is a little more distilled now, with we assigning a particular question and a set of people joining the discussion. And it's actually helping us to formulate our ideas around that particular topic, and the discussions are more engaged in that way. So in our discussions, we got a chance to discuss different cultures and how they looked at the idea of great mother, great father, and great son. And the discussions were really interesting. So I got a few things from that. So I really liked it.
Wonderful. And Victor, fantastic presentations as always. I think you're doing a fantastic job. You're just adding a lot of value here. Really, really appreciate that. And again, you're kind of taking it, I think I like the fact that you're doing this in a very personal way of saying, okay, what did you get from it? And you're trying to capture it and you're trying to illustrate it. So just wonderful. George, that was an amazing comment about kind of objective and subjective. Would you like to speak it out?
Well, it's quite similar to what you said. I'm plagiarizing Carl Jung.
Okay. Can you just say it so that people who are not reading it, can you go ahead?
Again, we got to be careful with generalizations, and this is definitely a generalization. But it's one that resonates with me. The West objectifies nature. And the East has a tendency to place emphasis on the subjective experiences. Again, this is a generalization, but it's a generalization that I find quite accurate.
Wonderful. Thank you. Roger, what did you get?
So yeah, really good discussions. I got a couple good points that I just wanted to call out. Like we were talking about chaos and order, and Alvaro actually pointed out a pretty good critique from the religious standpoint, and that was that he pointed out that chaos doesn't quite make sense from the narrative standpoint of a religious perspective, because at least in his canon, right? Like religions have so many different versions, but from his perspective, it's well known that there was already an established hierarchy, that there's heaven, that God and angels exist, that Lucifer, or whatever that entity is, has already had its fall from grace way before any of these events in Genesis happen. So therefore, the totality of the cosmos can't therefore be complete chaos, right? There's already been some order, at least somewhere in some way, which was an interesting critique that I had never considered. And additionally, David also made a great point on the nihilism one, pointing out that criticism of nihilism does work, but it works mostly on the premise of objective meaning, not subjective meaning. So therefore, like, that there is no meaning outside of us, but there still can be meaning inside of us, and that the nihilist can still, and one thing that we eventually ended up to was that the nihilist can still reject that, right? That can still reject the fact that, sure, maybe there is some inherent instinct that we should follow, but I don't want to do that, right? And just kind of own the fact that they don't, that they don't believe in that, even if there's a structure to it. But I really like it. Like, those were two, for example, just things that I hadn't considered, hadn't thought of, that made me see it in a different way. So those were things I wanted to mention.
What do you think of the format?
I really like the format. I think it works well with just being able to talk and share different ideas. But now that I know the format a little bit better, I'll try to pick the topics so that they lend more of themselves to this. So it'll work better.
Wonderful. All right, excellent. So folks, I want to tell you about the other meetups that we are doing. Let me see. There are a few things I want to highlight. Firstly, Yasuhiko Kimura is going to be back. He's Japanese-American philosopher who has translated Tao Te Ching, who spent 3 years in India studying Indian philosophy. He's completely familiar with the Western corpus, and he's going to be talking about the concept of self-realization, different paths to self-realization. That's going to be Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. On Monday, we are launching a new series on Nietzsche. I'm calling it Bite-Sized Nietzsche. We're going to be going through Zarathustra's speeches. They are very short, about 3-page, 4-page speeches. And we're going to be talking about the 3 metamorphoses. Are you a camel? Are you a lion? Or are you a child? Or some combination thereof. So that's going to be on Monday. I think that's going to be an incredible series. So don't miss that. On Tuesdays, we are doing Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching and what we are doing with Jordan Peterson here in this Bible series actually go very well together. And so I would invite you to explore that. All right. So thank you very much, everybody. And Roger, I think this is going really well. Roger and Victor, both of you are doing a fantastic job. And I think it is creating real dialogue. And it's wonderful. I think the timing also is working well, kind of making it kind of short enough so that there is, you put things on the table and then let people discuss. I think that's working very well. So thank you very much. See you next Thursday. Bye. See you.